Soy Ana de Azcárate y soy directora de la editorial Diente de León. En la editorial, como muchos sabréis, publicamos libros sobre ecología y salud y organizamos eventos de formación con nuestros autores. En nombre de todo nuestro equipo, que somos muchos por todas partes, les agradecemos que estén hoy aquí con nosotros. Este libro es impresionante, pero ha tenido una respuesta increíble, Tradiciones Culinarias, que aquí lo tengo, pero no he logrado cambiar el blur que tiene mi cámara y no lo pueden ver muy bien, pero bueno, en la web lo ven y bueno, ha tenido una acogida increíble. Se han inscrito más de 150 personas en la presentación de todas partes del mundo: Alemania, Argentina, Chile, Costa Rica, México, Guyana, Colombia, bueno, de todas partes, por supuesto España y muchos más países. Es súper motivador y alentador tener tanta gente aquí con nosotros interesados en tradiciones culinarias. Este es nuestro 11º libro, Tradiciones Culinarias, y está escrito por Fallon, que nos acompaña, que están viendo ahorita aquí con nosotros. Sally ha escrito varios libros sobre nutrición, no es el primero, es una súper cocinera y activista de la alimentación, y es por esto que ella funda, creo que en los años 90, algo así, la Fundación Weston Price, que es una institución que se ocupa de la educación en el campo de la nutrición y en la producción de alimentos. Sally se inspira de las investigaciones que hizo este odontólogo, Weston Price, para, con sus conocimientos de cocina y alimentación, fundar la fundación, porque, a ver, Weston Price era un odontólogo que a principios de en la década de 1930 visitó poblaciones que no habían sido tocadas por la industrialización y vio cómo esto afectaba la dentadura de las personas y por ende su salud. Entonces, Sally une estos estudios que forman parte de un libro que escribió Weston Price y sus propias inquietudes como investigadora de la nutrición, y monta la fundación y escribe este libro, Tradiciones Culinarias, que hoy nos convoca a todos aquí. Tradiciones Culinarias no es un libro al uso, es un libro súper inspirador y transgresor dentro del ámbito culinario. Contiene importante información sobre nutrición que respalda a Sally con investigaciones científicas para ofrecernos una visión nueva sobre la alimentación. En específico, Sally le da un gran protagonismo al rol que cumplen las grasas en nuestro cuerpo. Ella se ha ocupado de desmitificar el concepto erróneo de que las grasas saturadas son perjudiciales para nuestra salud y, muy por lo contrario, profesa sus grandes beneficios. El libro se ocupa también de destacar la importancia de las técnicas culinarias y la química de los alimentos en su digestión, porque no somos lo que comemos, sino lo que digerimos, y eso es algo súper importante en el libro. Lo verán en cada una de las recetas. Otra parte, es que el título del libro nos habla de ello, es lo de beber de la tradición, en retomar la forma en que nuestros abuelos y nuestros ancestros se alimentaban, en retomar procesos culinarios y recetas olvidadas. En ello radica una alimentación más nutritiva y consona con nuestro organismo, ¿no? Con nuestro cuerpo. Bueno, estoy segura que Tradiciones Culinarias les aportará mucha información relevante, sobre todo en un mundo donde hay mucho desconcierto y muchas dietas. Estamos aquí hoy en videoconferencia para que Sally nos hable de este libro, de las tradiciones culinarias, de Weston Price, de la Fundación, y nos puntualice cuáles son esos alimentos fundamentales para una buena nutrición. Espero que esta presentación les sea motivadora, y los que quieran comprar el libro en España ya lo podéis conseguir en las librerías o también en nuestra web. Los que estáis fuera nos podéis escribir a info@editorialdienteleón y les diremos la mejor forma de comprarlo dependiendo del país donde estéis. Y nos podéis seguir en Instagram, ahí también vamos a tener siempre información. Y les tenemos una sorpresa también. Todos los que puedan viajar a Madrid, Sally nos va a acompañar, va a venir no tenemos la fecha exacta ni lugar así, pero nos va a acompañar a finales de junio aquí en Madrid. Va a venir a presentar el libro y a dar unos talleres. Así que, bueno, nos encantaría contar con todos vosotros. Gracias, Sally, por estar aquí. Gracias a todo el equipo del Diente de León que me ha apoyado hoy a hacer el libro y a presentar esto. A Mónica, que nos está traduciendo y que me ayudó en la edición de este libro. Y a todos vosotros por estar aquí. Bueno, feliz tarde y Sally, it's your turn.
Well, thank you very much. And first of all, thank you for publishing the book. It's a very long and difficult book to publish. Is this everything working?
Yes.
Okay. And you, it took you a long time, which I'm very glad of because I know you did a careful job. And I'm thrilled to have this book in Spanish. When I talk to friends about my book, it's always the Spanish-speaking people who understand the easiest because they say, oh, my abuelita, she cooked this way. She gave us cod liver oil. She cooked in lard. She made broth. So my Spanish-speaking friends are the ones who understand this the quickest. Let's say that. So I am just thrilled that the book will be in Spanish, and I hope we can do everything possible to help you sell the book throughout the world, because there's more Spanish speakers than almost any other language. So I guess I'll just start by my own journey. And I have no background in nutrition. I started because I love to cook. My mother was an excellent cook. My parents were Francophiles, and I loved to do French cooking, and we cooked in butter and cream and eggs, and we made chicken liver, and we did all those things. And I have 4 children, and as I was raising my children, that's how I cooked for them. And at this time, this horrible message was coming out that we should eat low fat, low salt, high fiber, a horrible diet. It's like a punishment, you know? And I just knew that this was wrong. I knew that if you fed children this way, they'd be cranky and they'd be difficult and they'd be unhappy. So
Sally, right now I can't hear you well. Something's going on with your
I'm sorry.
audio.
Is that better?
Yeah.
Is that better?
Yes.
I'll be a little closer.
Yes, thank you so much.
So I knew this message that children should be on low-fat diets, skim milk, and low salt. I knew it was wrong. Just here, I knew it was wrong. And around the same time, in 1974, I discovered Nutrition and Physical Degeneration, which is the wonderful book by Dr. Weston Price. And I read the book, and it was like, hooray, I'm doing it right, because the diets that he described for these healthy people were high-fat diets. Butter, in fact, was considered a sacred food in many parts of the world, very important for having healthy children. Cheese and liver and all the things I was doing. So I continued, and my children are very healthy. I kind of proved what he said. He said, if you're eating this nutrient-dense diet, the children will have broad faces and they won't need braces. They'll have straight teeth. So all my children had straight teeth, and I had to have braces. So I proved to myself that this diet works. Then later, I got the idea that we needed a book that put Dr. Price's findings, his discoveries, into a practical form and with the recipes. So I had this idea to write Nourishing Traditions. It was an idea that kind of grabbed me, and I couldn't let it go. So I started. I never had written a book before. Didn't know what I was doing. But along the way, I met Dr. Mary Enig, who was a specialist in lipids, that's fats. So she was a PhD in fats, and her help was invaluable. And she said, you know, this is right. She was, like me, very concerned about the propaganda against butter and whole milk and animal fats. So the book came out in 1996. And again, I didn't know what I was doing. I had no public relations, nothing, but it was a word of mouth, and the book started to sell. So let's talk a little about Weston Price. He was actually a dentist. He had a very busy dental practice in Cleveland, Ohio. And there you go. Now we can see it. Yeah, we can see it now. So he was very concerned with what he saw in his patients. Almost everyone had lots of decay, lots of infection, and most people had what he called dental deformities, which means crowded, crooked teeth. The jaw is too narrow for all the teeth. And he had heard that in traditional cultures, people had naturally straight teeth. So he decided to find out for himself if this were true. And for 10 years, he traveled to different parts of the globe, looking at people's teeth and describing their health in general. In all, he found 14 communities, what we call primitive communities, non-industrial communities, that where the people had perfect health. They had virtually no cavities. Everybody had naturally straight teeth. People were sturdy and strong. The women were very beautiful. Childbirth was easy because not only were their faces wide, but the pelvic opening was broad, so babies were born easily. He didn't find any degenerative disease in any of these groups. One thing he looked for was tuberculosis, because that was a very big problem in those days, but he did not find any evidence of tuberculosis in these traditional cultures. So then the question was, he was able to compare people living on their traditional diet with people who switched to the white man's food, to processed foods, largely based on sugar, white flour, canned foods, and pasteurized milk. They went from raw milk to pasteurized milk. What happened was, in the first generation, these healthy people got lots of tooth decay. And this was a terrible thing because they had no dentist, so it was very painful. Then the next generation, the children who were born to parents who were eating processed food, they looked different. They had more narrow faces. The tribal characteristics were lost. And they had lots of tooth decay. And they became prone to diseases like tuberculosis. And childbirth became very difficult, painful, and life-threatening. This happened in just one generation. And we know from animal studies that if human beings or any species continues on a diet that does not provide the vitamins and minerals that we need, each generation gets weaker until by the fourth generation, there's no reproduction, okay? And we are in that fourth generation today. We say we're in the 11th hour. The situation is very serious. Many people living today who have children will not be grandparents. So this is a very serious situation. And if we don't turn it around, well, that's the end of the human race. So just to describe some of these diets, for example, he went all over the world. The diets were very different, but in Switzerland, the diet was raw milk from cows and goats, cheese, butter, cream, sourdough rye bread, and we'll talk about grains in a few moments, some meat, some meat with cooked in the broth with the soup, and they ate the organ meats. And this is something you find in every traditional culture. They ate the whole animal. And Europeans still do this because you have ways of incorporating liver and other organ meats into your sausage, your pate, liverwurst. This is something that we don't do as much in the US. So that was Switzerland. Then he went to an island off the coast of Scotland. And that diet was seafood, all different types of seafood, including the livers of the fish, and oats, which they made into porridge and oat cakes. So just seafood and oats, that was it. Then he went to, he went to the South Seas. Beautiful people in the South Seas. They had, their main carbohydrate was the taro root, which was fermented, just like the sourdough bread was fermented. Fish and pig. And again, a big emphasis on the organ meats, the blood and the fat of the pig, very important. In Australia and New Zealand, he again found a very varied diet of healthy, happy people. In Africa, again, big emphasis on the fats and organ meats of the animals. A lot of, there were more plant foods in the African diet, and a lot of grains that were fermented. So that just gives you an overview of what Dr. Price found. And he came up with 4 characteristics of healthy traditional diets. And we at the Weston A. Price Foundation have added 7 more to come up with our 11 principles. So what was the first principle? No refined or denatured foods. In healthy diets, no processed foods. So what's in processed foods that's so damaging to our health? There's 4 basic things. I call these the 4 horses of the apocalypse. Number 1, absolutely number 1, is industrial seed oils. So your canola oil, soybean oil, cottonseed oil, safflower oil, sunflower oil. These did not exist. And it is very difficult today to avoid these oils. They're in everything. And we are told to cook in these oils. They're in all processed foods. And there's relentless propaganda against the competition. And what's the competition? It's butter, ghee, lard, tallow from cows, poultry fats, and coconut oil also, but mainly the animal fats. And so we always say the first thing is to get your fats right, to go back to the traditional animal fats. And it can be very shocking to some people. The only real oil that we recommend is olive oil for your salad dressings. And you have to be very careful with olive oil. Most of it is contaminated or added with vegetable oils, industrial seed oils. It has to be pure olive oil. So there's the industrial fats and oils, the refined sweeteners and white flour, the refined foods that have no vitamins or minerals in them and are very stressful to blood sugar control. Number 3 is pasteurization, which completely destroys the goodness in milk products. And the 4th one is all of the additives that make these foods palatable. Number 1 is MSG. We have another one now called Cinnamix, which is in all processed foods. And these additives affect the hormones in the body. They affect the hypothalamus, which is the master gland, and controls weight, controls sexual hormones, stress hormones. So, and actually there have been studies showing that MSG makes people violent. So, you know, these are very damaging, serious additives in the food. So that's the first step, to get the processed foods out of your diet and go home and cook. Cook for your family using the kind of ingredients that your grandmothers would have used. Okay. And the second characteristic, and this gets me in a lot of trouble, is there were no vegetarian or vegan diets. And Dr. Price he was looking for cultures that lived on plant foods, because this was a big subject in his day. Can you hear me now? This was a big subject in his day. There was a lot of promotion of vegetarianism, just like today. And he came right out and said, I never found a healthy culture that was living entirely on plant foods. You absolutely need the animal foods in your diet. So, and I say propaganda because I'll just give you one example, a study, I think it was 2014, where researchers did a survey, and they had two groups, those who identified as vegetarian, and those who said they ate meat. And the vegetarians, they had more tooth decay, they had more allergies, they had more mental health problems, they had a lower quality of life, they were more lonely, they were in the hospital more, and here's the really surprising one, they had more cancer. And we're told that if you have cancer, you should go on a vegetarian diet, or if you want to prevent cancer, you should go on a vegetarian diet. But that's not what this study found. All right, now we get to the third principle, and this is the most important one, and the one we spend the most time on trying to explain to people. Dr. Price analyzed these foods in his laboratory, and no matter what they were eating, whether it was pork and taro in the South Seas or milk and rye bread in Switzerland, no matter what they were eating, the levels of vitamins and minerals were very high. So the levels of minerals were 4 times higher in the traditional primitive diet than in the modern American diet of his day. So lots of minerals. But the real surprise was the very high levels of what we call fat-soluble vitamins. These are the vitamins that we get from organ meats and animal fats and certain types of seafood. So there are 3 vitamins, and they need to go together. One is vitamin A, and vitamin A has been demonized for the past 50 years, really, but vitamin A is extremely important for healthy reproduction, for your eyes, for hormone production, for digestion, for just about everything, for your skin. And so vitamin A is number 1. Number 2 is vitamin D. And now everybody's doing vitamin D, but the problem is that you need vitamin A for the vitamin D to work. So we're very much concerned about taking vitamin D supplements. And then the last one was called Dr. Price's X factor. He did not know what it was, but he felt this was an extremely important vitamin. He had a test for it that just turned iodine a certain color, but he didn't know what it was. And now we do know what it was. It's vitamin K2. And vitamin K2 is, again, it's in butter, it's in egg yolks, it's in poultry fats, goose fat, duck fat, it's in poultry liver. And vitamin K2 works with vitamins A and D. So we call it the vitamin triangle, and you need these 3 vitamins, A, D, and K, in large amounts to be healthy. So again, this points us to all of the foods which our government is telling us not to eat. They say don't eat butter. I don't know if there's been a campaign against lard in Spain, but you can't even buy lard in the supermarkets today. They tell you not to eat the skin on the chicken, right? and certainly not to use duck fat or goose fat. And these are very important fats in many cultures. And of course, we're even told not to eat eggs, too much cholesterol, you know. So these are the very foods that we need to put back into our diet. And of course, they're the foods that are delicious and satisfying and make everything taste good. So our diet is actually very easy to follow. Okay, do you want to stop for some questions or should I go on?
I think we can leave some minutes at the end, and people
Okay.
in the chat, they're like, just told them that they can post the questions, and then I can actually tell them to you. I can because I will. They can't put their mic on, so I will have to do it.
Okay. Well, I'll give you a little bit more.
Okay.
Now, the last principle that Dr. Price described was the principle of preparing for pregnancy. They were not, you know, we're so careless in the West about how we bring children into the world, but they prepared for each child by eating special foods at least 6 months before conception. And then the mother continued these foods when she was pregnant and breastfeeding, and the children were given these foods for growth. And they recognized that when the baby's being formed and growing, that's when you need the most nutrition. And in the West, that's when the nutrition is the worst for our children. And what were these sacred foods? Well, very often it was liver, and we all should be eating liver twice a week. Poultry liver, beef liver, calf's liver. Butter was one of the sacred foods. In Switzerland, it was the butter that they got in the spring. It was very deep yellow, and the cows were eating rapidly growing green grass. So butter was one. Eggs, of course, and in many cultures, it was fish eggs. So I call this the pate and caviar diet. So it's fine to eat caviar. Very, very important healthy food. They also had the practice of spacing their children. It was considered shameful to have a child more than once every 3 years. So they not only prepared for pregnancy, but they allowed the mother to rest between the pregnancies so that the second child and the third child would have the same nutritional advantages as the first child. So those were Dr. Price's 4 characteristics, and we have looked at other things as well. One has to do with grains. So many of these cultures did eat grains. So the question is, why are so many people having trouble with grains today? And the main reason is that grains are actually very hard to digest. After all, they're designed to go through an animal front to back and still be intact. That's how they get spread around. So in traditional cultures, they somehow recognized this, and they never ate their grains unless they were fermented first. So soaked or with some kind of culture. And the perfect example is the sourdough bread. So you can include bread in our diet. It should be sourdough, whole grain, and clean grain. One of our problems in the United States is that the grain is all sprayed with Roundup, glyphosate, just before harvest. So our grains are very polluted. They're very toxic. But if you make bread or say porridge, oatmeal, use organic grains and soak them overnight, or do sourdough. Another characteristic that is universal in traditional cultures is fermented foods. Now, the fermented food that Europeans are most familiar with is sauerkraut, so raw fermented cabbage. But there's some surprising ones. The traditional charcuterie in Spain and France, that is fermented. If it's really made in the traditional way, that is a fermented food. Cheese is a fermented food. In Scandinavia, they ferment the salmon and make gravlax, which is a fermented food. There were fermented foods all over the world. The Eskimos fermented their fish. A lot of cultures fermented the animal foods. And in the South Seas, they fermented the taro. In Asia, they have many fermented foods, and the Africans were the real stars of fermentation. And this included beverages. So there's a very great need for healthy soft drinks. And something that's now very popular in the United States is kombucha. This is not Coca-Cola. This is a fermented beverage. A lot of people make their own, but you can also buy it in the stores. But we really do urge people to include fermented foods in their diet every day. It's a little bit of sauerkraut or fermented pickles. There's many recipes in the book, and they're easy to do. And why do we need fermented foods? Well, science has shown us why, because now we know that a healthy human being has up to 5 pounds of good bacteria in the gut for fermentation, for digestion. And we can replenish those bacteria every day and give ourselves good gut flora, as we say, by eating fermented foods. Another very important characteristic is every one of these diets contains salt. They went to a lot of trouble to get the salt. Salt is essential for life. The basic biochemistry of our bodies is based on salt. We need salt for the development and maintenance of our brain. We need salt for digestion. We need the sodium in salt for enzymes that digest carbohydrates. And we need the chloride in salt for hydrochloric acid to digest meat. And a low salt diet very often leads to parasites because you don't have enough hydrochloric acid to keep out the parasites. And this again is contrary to everything that's being taught. They're trying to get us to reduce salt. And this is a kind of genocide. We need salt. We need at least 8 grams of salt a day. And in 1900, we ate 16 to 18 grams of salt a day because all of our meat was salted. So we're eating a lot lower levels of salt today than we used to. Your salt should be unrefined, like the Celtic sea salt. I'm sure you have salt in Spain that is the natural unprocessed salt, and that will give you a lot of good minerals, trace minerals, and iodine as well. So now where am I? I lost my track. You want a balance of what we call omega-6 and omega-3. That means balancing land animals with seafood. Very important to have seafood in your diet. The omega-3 is in the seafood, but also in eggs. And the omega-6 and other types of fats are in the land animals. So that's a very important one. Finally, I'll just touch on cooking. Every culture cooked. That's what defines us as being human. Even on their canoes in the South Seas, they built fires and cooked their fish. One thing that we shouldn't cook is our dairy products. The components in milk are extremely fragile, and they are warped and distorted when we cook them. So we have spearheaded an effort to bring raw milk back in the United States and throughout the world. And I know that you can get raw milk in Spain. So, but the meat was cooked, and meat proteins are very tightly bound. And by cooking them, we actually relax those proteins and make our meat easier to digest. But they did eat some of their meats raw. The Eskimos ate raw fish. We have in Europe, every European culture has at least one raw meat dish that they eat occasionally. And I believe we need to do that to get enough B6, vitamin B6. The plant foods were mostly cooked. So all of the vegetables and many of the fruits and the grains, they were all cooked. They were fermented. The grains were fermented and then cooked. And I think we get in a lot of trouble when we try to eat foods that should be cooked and we eat them raw. And one of my biggest concerns is this fad of juicing, where they're juicing kale and dark green vegetables, and even things like apples, which has a lot of pectin in it, which can be very irritating, and making these juices. And our traditional people didn't make, they made soup, but not juice. So I think this is I think I've pretty much touched on everything, and I'm happy to answer questions.
Okay. Yes.
Let me just conclude, okay? This is not a weird diet. It's not a diet of privation or deprivation. It's a diet that everyone can embrace, that's fun to eat, that's satisfying. We even include naturally sweetened desserts in this diet. We have delicious, healthy beverages, plenty of fat, all the salt you want. This is a fun diet, and it's not that hard to do. So that's the thought I would like to leave you with. This is not something where you have to deprive yourself.
Thank you, Sally. Gracias. Yeah. Well, here are some questions. And Julio asks, is it important to mix proteins, fat, vegetables, and fruit? Do you mix them?
Yes, and everybody, there were no rules like you couldn't eat this with this in these cultures. But I think the key is proper preparation. Okay, something I forgot in the list of characteristics, most of these cultures made broth with the bones. And that's your bouillon for your soups and your beautiful sauces. We're all for sauces if they're homemade. And that the broth is very helpful for digestion. So if you eat a dinner where you have potatoes and meat and fruit, whatever, if you start with a soup that has broth in it, it will be very easy to digest all of these things together.
Thank you. Julio also asked, is the chicken skin healthy?
Yes, it's the most healthy part. That's where the vitamin K is. That's where the X factor is. That's where the good fats are, the fat soluble vitamins. And we eat the skin with the chicken. And of course, chicken without skin is horrible. It's just dry and tasteless. So yes, eat the skin. Now, all of our animal products in the industrial system, are not good. You definitely want to buy organic or raised outside on a natural feed if you can find it.
Okay. Choose is asking, what about vitamin A, D, and K2?
Yes. So we need to get those from food. You need to eat liver once or twice a week. Use butter. Cook in lard. It's a wonderful source of vitamin D. Eggs from chickens raised outside have all 3 vitamins, A, D, and K. Cheese is a wonderful source. Whole milk. So we need to get these from food, from these animal foods raised outdoors, and then from seafoods as well. Shellfish and oily fish, fish eggs are all great.
Okay. Leticia says that she can find animal fat, meat, skin, organs, but the usual is not to find grass-fed. So
yeah, that's a shame, and I think this is the case throughout Europe. I know that most of the animal farms in Holland, Belgium, and even France, England, well, not so much England, the animals are in confinement. Well, it's better than not eating the animal foods, let's put it like that. But in the States, we're way ahead of you there. It's because we have more land. and it's quite easy to get pasture fed. What I can say is find the farmers who are doing it. There must be some, and support them and buy from them. And this is what our local chapters do in all of these countries. They keep a list of where these foods are and you know how you can get them.
Well, in Spain, aquí hablo en español, está de hierba, que aglutina a ganaderos de toda España que tienen animales de pasto. Y hay, bueno, y yo, una cosa que no había dicho antes es que yo soy responsable local o chapter leader de la Fundación Weston Price, y una de mi obligación básica es dar información sobre dónde conseguir alimentos nutritivos de calidad. Así que después también me podéis escribir a Ana@editorial Diente de León y les puedo suministrar mi lista de ganaderos que practican ganadería de pasto en España. Y bueno, so that's it. So Nicole is asking,
Ana, ¿me oyes?
Sí.
Me parece que no se te ha escuchado porque estabas en el canal, ¿puede ser?
Porque
Alguien decía
estaba en
que no se te
inglés.
escuchaba.
¿Nadie me escuchaba? No, ¿ahora se me escucha? ¿Ahora todo el mundo me escuchó o no? ¿Me escuchan o no? ¿Me escuchas, Mónica? Do you hear me, Sally?
Mm-hmm.
Yes?
Yeah.
And if I talk now, do you hear me now also? You don't hear
Yes,
me?
I hear you.
Well, Mónica is saying that people didn't hear me, but anyway, lo que estaba diciendo, espero que me oigan, es que en España hay ganadería de pasto, que hay una web que se llama De Hierba, ahí pueden consultar a todos los ganaderos que hay aquí, y que yo soy responsable local o chapter leader de la Weston Price en Madrid, y que si me queréis contactar en Ana@editorial Diente de León, les puedo suministrar mi listado de proveedores de comida en España, pero básicamente en Madrid, que es mi zona. Okay, Sally, so there is a person from Chile that she lives in Holland now, and she would like to know if there is any consequences of being Chilean but living in Holland and changing her diet.
No, I don't think so. I think it's the principles that are important. So, you know, I'm a person who likes dairy products and milk, and I actually eat probably less meat than most people, but I do the dairy products. But the important thing is that you're getting all of these nutrients. So whether you're doing it with fish and rye bread or pork and the shellfish or whatever, it's just important that you get these nutrients.
Okay. Well, someone is mentioning if it's very nutritious to have bone broth.
Yes. And so when we eat meat, we're getting all of the nutrients of the meat, muscle meat. But half of the proteins in your body are collagen. Your tendons, your joints. You have collagen lining your skin, lining the digestive tract, collagen in your eye. And to nourish the collagen, you need to eat collagen. And collagen is very tough. It's hard to chew. And the way people have always done it is to cook the bones and the tough parts of the meat and make a broth. And our grandmothers all did this, or our great grandmothers. You know, my mother cooked chicken broth. So we need to get back to this habit. Now in the States, you actually can buy traditionally made broth, but most of my friends and most of the people I know do it themselves. We have here slow cookers. Do you have slow cookers?
Yes.
And we just save bones and put them in the slow cooker. and so we always have broth. I can tell you that if you are having trouble with digestion, and so many people are, the broth is wonderful for digestion. It helps for technical reasons. It helps digest your food, and it also strengthens the small intestine and the large intestine so that you're digesting better and absorbing better. And we have a lot of sayings about chicken broth in our country. We say chicken soup for the soul. We say that the chicken broth gives you beautiful skin. We have all of these traditions, and they are all supported by the science. And then, of course, you use your broth to make gravy and sauces and soups, and they're delicious.
Julio is asking, what do you think about ormus? I don't know what ormus is. It's O-R-M-U-S.
Ormus. Oh, like orbitally rearranged monoatomic elements. Is that what you mean? I think so. That's very esoteric. I'm very interested in that subject. And I do, in my garden, I put a mineral powder that has that in it. But it would take me a very long time to explain that.
And Carolina is asking about peanuts. How can you eat them without having so much stomach troubles?
Yeah. Peanuts are a legume, so very hard to digest. And like we have a way of preparing nuts. We soak them in salt water and then dehydrate them. But peanuts have another problem, and this is something I just learned. It's not in the book, unfortunately. Peanuts are very high in alanine. It's amino acid. And when you have too much of alanine, you do get digestive problems. So I would say for the peanuts, don't overdo, and balance the peanuts with the meat and dairy products and so forth, eggs. Don't overdo on peanuts.
Okay. Nicole is asking about fish and all sea products because of the microplastic and the contamination of the sea.
Yeah. Well, first of all, you want wild seafood. Yeah, I don't know if there's a really good answer for that. This is something new. We still eat fish, but again, the worst food to eat is farmed fish. There have been many reports on this, and a lot of plastic in the farmed fish.
Okay. Carolina is asking about the sugar in fruit, if it's possible to sweeten desserts with that. Will it be a problem?
Well, don't forget, when you're doing sugar from fruit, it becomes very concentrated when you boil down the juice. And also it's only fructose. And that seems to be a problem as well when your sweetener is only fructose. There are many wonderful natural sweeteners: honey, maple syrup. They make a sugar out of the coconut sap. You can take sugar cane and just boil it and dehydrate it so it's not refined. So there are many natural sweeteners that we can use that, in moderation, in homemade desserts is just fine.
Okay. Can you talk about omegas and supplementation?
Okay, so quite interesting. Everybody's talking about omega-3 and omega-6 and having a balance and so forth. The first book to do that was Nourishing Traditions. So, and that's the one thing that's caught on from the book. But I think people are now, they're trying to get omega-3 and they're getting too much. And the worst thing are the fish oil capsules, which are worthless, very polluted. They come from farm fish. And it's too much omega-3. And because they've been heated, that omega-3 is broken down and it's very toxic. So if you just do our diet, eat pastured eggs, and if you eat some liver and eat some seafood, you're going to get all the omega-3 that you need. You don't need a lot.
Why do you recommend, or why is it recommended to do bone broth with vinegar?
The vinegar helps bring the minerals out into the water. Just you want it a little bit acidic.
Okay. Well, Julia wants to thank you for your wisdom and for, you know, publishing such an amazing books, and that her daughter is you know, growing. She's a 1-year-old and she's growing really, really well because of your baby formulas.
Oh, good. You know, when we hear from parents about these healthy babies, you know, healthy child is rare today, especially in the United States. All these babies are sick. They all have something wrong with them. And to hear about these beautiful, healthy babies growing up on our diet, that's what keeps us going. That is the future. That is why we all need to work together to have healthy babies. That is our main focus at the Weston A. Price Foundation, supporting the parents, and as the parents, doing the right thing.
Sidley saying that I mean, they recommend to cook with refined coconut oil. And she asks, is it because the natural, the flavor and the smell is it doesn't taste that well?
That's true. A lot of people don't like the smell of the coconut, especially if it's heated. Personally, I don't like to cook with coconut oil for that reason. I make a beverage where I add hot water and molasses to the coconut oil. Makes a beautiful substitute for coffee. And I like to cook with coconut milk. That's a wonderful ingredient. But yes, they refine it to get rid of the taste.
Do you have any experience, Jessica is asking, an experience or any information how to difundir, extend this knowledge of the way of the Weston Price, I mean, of the diet, the Nourishing Traditions diet, to people with low budget, people with very low income?
Well, I actually do talk about this in the book. Just for example, if you buy a whole chicken, and let's just say let's say you have a family with 2 children. If you buy 2 chickens, whole chickens, and make roast chicken, you can make 3 more meals out of that chicken. And it's much less expensive to buy the whole chicken than it is to buy the parts. So that's one suggestion. Breakfast cereals, you know, the dry cereals, I don't know what you call them in Spanish. They're extremely expensive. They're $5 or $6 a box, and there's no food value in them at all. You can make oatmeal soaked overnight and serve it with butter, and it costs less than the packaged. Now, some of your foods cost more. Butter costs more than margarine or a spread. But a lot of your foods are going to cost less. And you know, following some of these examples, and if you're not, just take soft drinks, you know, they're very expensive. You're going to cut those out. All the processed food is very expensive. We've actually published several articles. One was by an accountant, and she tracked her food expenses. She didn't have a lot of money, and she had a big family, and she found that it was less expensive to eat this way than to eat using a lot of processed foods.
Thank you. Sheila is asking, how do you recommend to eat proteins? With what kind of food? Proteins. How do you recommend to eat proteins? With how do you mix it? With what kind of foods?
Oh, with everything. Again, as I was saying earlier, if everything is properly prepared and you have a nice gravy or a sauce with your bone broth, you will be able to digest it very well.
And with this type, Julio is asking that with this type of diet that you're recommending, is there a way to lose weight?
Yes, well, first of all, it's very satisfying. You probably don't eat as much, but lots of people lose weight on this diet. And there are studies showing that if you have two groups of rats on the same number of calories, the rats that are getting the vegetable oils will gain weight, whereas the rats on the natural saturated fats don't gain weight.
Okay. So Carolina is asking, how many days do you have to ferment sourdough so it's more nutritious?
At least a day. You want to ferment at least a day. So when you buy, not many of us make bread. I have to confess, I don't make my own bread. So you want to find bread that you know is truly sourdough, which is what I do.
Okay. Do you recommend carbon C60?
Do I recommend what?
Carbono C60. Jika is asking, do you recommend carbon, which is carbon 660?
I'm afraid I don't know what it is.
And do we, someone is asking, if we will find traditional recipes in the book, or, ancestral?
Yes, the whole book is ancestral recipes.
Okay.
For grains, for soups, for sauces, for meats, for vegetables. Now, I don't know, I'm sure some of them will not be familiar to the Spanish-speaking audience, but many of them will be.
Okay. So Chus is asking about legumes.
Yes, legumes.
Um,
So legumes are very hard to digest, and everybody knows you need to soak them, and soak them a long time. You soak and rinse and soak and rinse, and then you cook them a long time. Legumes are part of many healthy diets. There's nothing wrong with them as long as they're properly prepared.
Okay. So Nicole is saying that in Holland, all the food that that's promoting in the book is every time more expensive because of the tax. Yeah.
Taxed?
Yes, tax issues. Yes. That's what I understand from her.
That's a shame. I mean, in the States, food is not taxed anywhere. But I wouldn't be surprised if they're taxing the healthy foods. It's a way of keeping us unhealthy, enriching the medical profession, lowering the IQ of the nation.
Yeah.
So are you saying that, for example, they tax butter, but they don't tax margarine?
That maybe, I don't know, but I think Nicole will have to explain a bit more about that. But anyway, so Jessica is asking if you have applied this diet in a community level.
just our own community, you mean with the whole group living in one place? We would like to very much, and we've looked for funding to do that, but the answer is basically no. In institutions like hospitals, schools, nursing homes, typically the food is the very worst quality and based on vegetable oils. You can't get butter in these places. We even had a story of a mother who was sending a thermos of whole milk to daycare with her child. The child was 3 years old. And the food police came and told the lady who was running the daycare center that she would be fined if the mothers were sending whole milk with their children. And this is, well, it's incredible, really. But you can see the lengths to which these people are going to deprive our children of the foods they need.
Well, this is the last question, Sally, because we are already 10 minutes past time. And it's Marisa. She's asking, how is the impact in the body with the added vitamin A and D in the cod liver oil?
Well, I'm not quite understanding the question.
Nor do I, because I mean, cod liver oil has vitamin A and D. It's not
Yes.
added to it. But
Well, no, wait.
okay.
Most cod liver oil, all the cod liver oil that's molecularly distilled, that's most of the cod liver oil from Iceland and Norway. They heat it so many times that the natural A and D is no longer there. And they add synthetic A and D. Now, there are only a few brands of cod liver oil that we recommend, and some of them are available in Europe. So go to our website. We have a special page on cod liver oil. We also have a shopping guide. Hang on. We have a shopping guide, and you can look at this online. And the very last page is cod liver oil. And these are the brands that we recommend, right at the back.
Okay. Well, Nicole wrote about explaining about the taxes, and she says that most of the meat and the milk products have risen the prices in this last month, and mainly because of the excuse of climate change.
Oh, yes. And they're closing down the farms in Holland, 30% of the farms. Now, mind you, these farms are all confinement farms. And again, this is one place where we really have an advantage in the States because we have so much land.
Yeah, but then she says that they're creating these vegetarian weeks and trying that people, withdraw from that.
Oh, I know. They're doing that here too. They made a vegetarian hamburger.
Yeah.
And it was a huge failure. Nobody wants it.
Okay. So Sally, I guess everyone asked that many times, but what would you recommend, that one thing or two things that you would really recommend that? Yeah.
I would say number one is get your fats right. F-A-T-S. We say get your facts right, F-A-C-T-S, but get your fats right. So eat the right kinds of fats, even if it costs more. We recommend that you make your salad dressing, because look at the labels on salad dressings. They just are garbage, and they're the worst types of oils. So make your salad dressing with olive oil. It won't cost you any more. It's easy to do. There's 36 recipes for salad dressing in the book. So start there and use butter. If you can get lard, I would cook in lard. It's certainly not going to be any more expensive than vegetable oil. So that's number one, get your fats right. And I would say number two, try, it's hard, I know, but try to lower your sugar consumption. And I think you'll find on this diet, because it's so satisfying, you won't crave sugar as much.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Sally.
Thank you, and we'll see you all soon. We're
Yes.
planning a visit to Spain. I'm so excited to come. I'm coming with our executive director, and we'll have the book for everyone and some materials in Spanish from the foundation.
Yes, yes, yes. I will very soon post some information about that.
Okay.
We decided. Okay, bye-bye. Thank you. Gracias, Mónica. Very good. Ciao.
Gracias a todo el mundo.